Continuing our Enduring Faith Bible Study series, and we get a chance to look at the road to Emmaus, Jesus speaking with two, we'll call them disciples, on the road to Emmaus. It actually is a really good connection to our gospel lesson today. If you are a 745 worshiper, you got yourself a little bit of a head start on our opening question. But I'd like you to take 2 minutes at your table discussing these two questions. Would you agree with the statement, seeing is believing? Are there some ways or reasons that you would disagree? So take a few minutes, discuss that at your tables. He's risen. Take 30 more seconds, finish up your thoughts. Who would like to get us started? Who'd like to share their thoughts? Seeing is believing. Trish? Okay, the source has a lot to do with how credible, how reliable the words or the statement is. Okay? Anyone else?
Our first comment was, excuse me, seeing used to be believing, but now with the internet and all the things that have happened, our level of skepticism is so high
Okay.
that it's hard. We want deeper proof than just even our own eyes.
Okay. So YouTube is not necessarily equal belief, at least on table 4 over here. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Seeing is believing.
We
Bill.
have pretty much the same discussion because you don't know, if you see images on the screen, you can't tell if it's a real person or if it's computer generated, or so I think we agree that today seeing doesn't clinch it for you. You've got to look deeper.
Now there's a little bit of digging in that needs to happen.
Which in turn makes it even more difficult for us as church to reach out to people because the skepticism is so high of institutions.
Sure.
You're just another institution.
Yeah. So there's
We've got a harder sell.
there's maybe that doubt. Sure. Yeah. Seeing is believing. It sort of depends, right? If I told you I could run around the block and be back here teaching 2 minutes from now, we could sit here and calculate math and distance and how fast can the average human travel and how fast can Pastor Hockman travel, lower than average. Or we could easily settle that by saying, prove it, right? I got 2 minutes to see, I think this might be entertaining as well, right? See, if I see it, then I'll believe it. That's a statement that could easily be made. Linda, I'm not going to do it.
If you had a reputation like a track star would, I believe it. And God is a reputation that he has built up that we would believe what he said.
Okay.
So if he told us, he was going to rise in 3 days, he'll rise in 3 days.
Right, when our God has a good track record. This is like the old analogy about the homeless person who promises to give you $10,000. Thanks, buddy, right? And you're gonna keep walking. But if you met Bill Gates and he said, I'll give you $10,000, you might still wonder, well, why? That would be silly. But if Bill Gates was your uncle and said, I'm gonna give you $10,000, now you know something about him, you have a relationship, and he has a track record and a history to be able to follow through with that, right? So now you've got some proof. It's more than just seeing the statement, but rather there's those things that defend it as well. We had the gospel lesson today of Jesus in the upper room on 2 different occasions with Thomas, and the disciples were very much in a I need to see it in order to believe it kind of mentality and mindset. That concept plays in a bit here with the story that is before us today, Jesus appearing to the disciples on the road to Emmaus. So why don't we jump into that? We'll go ahead and start with the first section from Luke 24. That is verses 13 through 27. Now that same day, so Easter Sunday, some of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed those things with each other, Jesus himself came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. He asked them, "What are you discussing together as you walk along?" They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in these days?" "What things?" he asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. What is more, it is the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see Jesus. He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things and then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. Okay, that's the first section we're going to take a look at. So, where's Emmaus? 7 miles from Jerusalem, it says. Kind of an interesting thing. We don't know for sure where this city is other than this detail. There is a city named Emmaus they found. It's 20 miles from Jerusalem. So that might be like the neighboring village that they moved out of the original town and then moved a little bit further up the road. They have found, archaeologists have found some items 3.5 miles northwest of Jerusalem that they think maybe could be this city of Emmaus. So some have speculated that maybe 7 miles here is a round trip figure, which maybe comes into play if you consider the timeline. So this is evening of Easter Sunday. We know at the end they go running back to Jerusalem. So is that a 7-mile jog that they go for? Maybe not. That might take a little bit more time. They end up still, there has to be time for Jesus to appear in the upper room. Now, we don't know if they went for like a late lunch in Emmaus and the disciples were night owls. Obviously, none of this is definitive. Perhaps there is a town 7 miles away that we don't know. But this, where exactly is Emmaus, is interesting. I'm a map guy. I love putting maps up on the screen. I didn't want to because we don't know where it is. So, so either 7 miles is the round trip, or there is one and we just don't have evidence of where it had been, Emmaus. Okay? What do we know about who these disciples, who these followers were? What can we say with certainty? John?
They knew about Jesus.
Okay, they were familiar with Jesus. Marjorie? They knew the 12 disciples. Seems like they weren't members of the 12, right? They go running back, and we're told that they reported to the 11. Now, maybe these are 2 of Jesus' disciples, and the 11 is just this. Used to be called the 12, now we're missing Judas. So the 11 is this title. It could be, it'd be like if I said I went and reported to the pastors at Grace. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm excluded or that I'm not a pastor. So maybe they are disciples of Jesus. Probably not. They end up in the upper room and then Jesus appears there. So these 2 Emmaus disciples are there in the upper room when Jesus appears. Now, we know the 11 were there, but that doesn't mean that they were before. So, Linda? Jewish people? Okay. Tricia? One was named Cleopas. We have the name of one of them. Interestingly, we don't have the name of the other. So, I uncovered kind of an interesting theory that I had not noticed before, or was not recalling anyways. Cleopas is maybe potentially the same person as Clopas. So we're told in John 19, the 3 people that were at Jesus' crucifixion is Mary, Jesus' mother, Mary Magdalene, and Mary of Clopas is what the Greek says. Most would assume that means Mary, wife of Clopas. So, if Mary is the wife of Clopas and that Clopas is Cleopas here, that would show why Cleopas would have an interesting connection. There's a tradition within the Roman Catholic Church that Clopas is actually the brother of Joseph married to Mary. So that would make Clopas the brother-in-law to Mary, which would explain why he's there at the crucifixion if he's there to support his sister-in-law, Mary. Especially, most would assume that Joseph is already dead, so there's even more support for Mary, who here is experiencing this horrible tragedy of watching her son be crucified. So if that is all correct, which is a speculation, it's a big maybe, you've perhaps have Mary's brother-in-law Clopas as one of these Emmaus disciples. And then another interesting wrinkle to that, who's this other person? We know that they are heading to Emmaus. We assume they're heading to their home in Emmaus because, remember, it's evening and they say to Jesus, they don't know that it's him, you should stay here in our home. So is Clopas and is this a college roommate frat house situation? Or perhaps this other disciple is Mary. Perhaps this is Clopas and his wife Mary who live in Emmaus and have this connection to Jesus. You read all over the place, the two men who traveled over to Emmaus, but the scriptures never say that they were both male, at least not that I have found. So I think that is an interesting possible connection that ties it all together, that makes it make sense, that gives them a connection. Why is it that they are so familiar with the 12? Why is it that they were heading to Emmaus in the first place? Why is it that they apparently shared a home? I think it's plausible, if not probable, that this is Clopas and his wife Mary, who are on their way from Jerusalem to their home in Emmaus, in nearby Emmaus. Speculation, we don't know. We know for sure one of them is Cleopas, and that's where the scripture record chooses to stop. But I found that interesting. Okay. Jesus approaches these two and strikes up a conversation with them. Verse 16 has a pertinent detail, which I think does play into the who are these people discussion. Can you find it? Pertinent detail in verse 16. Jill?
Usually when you read someone out of context, you release have a feeling about them, but the word kept.
Okay. They were kept. Right. Some might say if this is Jesus' cousin, if this is or uncle, wouldn't uncle recognize? But this statement here was kept. They were kept from. So regardless of their familiarity, these two disciples would have recognized Jesus under normal circumstances, but miraculously their eyes were closed. They were kept from recognizing, which then I think opens up the possibility for the closest of relations to be these two disciples. Okay? They stood still, their faces downcast. Why was this their demeanor? And is that surprising to you? Lori? They were sad?
Sad that, because it says they were talking about what had happened.
They were discussing everything. They were sad about the loss of their friend. Okay. I don't know if it's reading too much into it, but it's interesting that they're talking, and then Jesus says, "Oh, what are you talking about?" And then that is like the trigger for now they're internalizing, but now they have to share it with someone else. Seems like a frustrating thing. Beth? Okay, disillusioned. Pastor Hebner talked about I'm not going to get all of his words that started with C out, the cacophony of confounding and confusion. All of these emotions that are going on, and they even articulate that as they play out the story. Like, he died, we thought he was the one, and there's these other reports too, and we're just kind of confused, right? Linda?
Possible they were also afraid. Here's somebody that
Yeah, it could be. Maybe they were feeling like we get to at least leave this mess behind and we can go home. And now someone, the stranger, like, hey, so what's up? Like, come on. Right, skepticism, wondering, are you some sort of Roman operative that's trying to round up everyone?
They were trying to, are you the only person who was in Jerusalem today that didn't know what was going on?
Right. Their response is interesting. How in the world do you not have an idea? Yep. I have a story like that. Do we have time for a story like that? I was in Wittenberg, Germany on the 500th anniversary of Luther's nailing of the 95 Theses, and they had this huge festival, and I overheard a conversation. A guy said, now, it seems like there's a lot of people that are taking pictures at that door in particular. I wonder what that's all about. I'm like, why are you here?
They just came for the
They must have. They just followed the bus in. So, yeah, same kind of concept though, right? Like, you've been in Jerusalem and you don't know. I wonder if there was a sparkle in Jesus' eye as he says, oh yeah, what things? Oh, tell me. He's really opening the door for them to open their hearts, right? Trish.
I just had a question, because like the first thing they said is like he was supposed to be the one to redeem Israel. Is that as the savior of sins, or is that more like the Roman rule thing?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's our next question, actually. We had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. What do you make of this statement? Was I taking too long on the previous one? Okay, all right, thank you. Fair enough. Yeah, what do you make? What do you think? Dorcas.
It seems like they still don't understand why Jesus was there on earth. They're still thinking of him as an earthly king, it sounds like. They think he's talking about redeeming Israel.
Right. That's the way, John?
Yeah, the use of that word, I mean, in verse 20, they talk about him being a prophet to both God and the people. And then they use the word redeem. Now, depends on how they see that, or using that word. Saving Israel in an earthly sense,
Right.
or is it a spiritual sense? So
Yeah.
you want to take the words from verse 20 and figure, well, they're believers.
Yeah.
So best construction, you say, well, they're talking about the spiritual saving of Israel, not from the Romans.
Right. Yeah, we don't know for sure. We know even the disciples on the day of Jesus' ascension ask, Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom to Israel? They're still in a political mindset, so it wouldn't be out of the question to have the circle of other disciples that are still thinking along these lines. Interestingly, Pentecost comes and we don't hear any more of that, right? I think that's one of the special gifts of the Holy Spirit, was this clarity to finally get it. We looked in the gospel today, our story here, we're seeing doubts and confusion and lack of clarity. Post-Pentecost, we don't seem to see that anymore. It seems much more like God has now instilled that special gift of wisdom, knowledge, desire to spread the gospel, and now the church is going like gangbusters. So I kind of feel like this is more the downcast of, we were hoping to gain some earthly benefit from this guy. We were hoping that he might be the one who got us free from Roman rule, but nope, it's going to be more of the same. It's going to be more of being subject to this higher power. That word redeem, obviously we have connected some second article happiness to that concept, but I wonder, and even if it is, even if we were hoping he would be the one who would save us, there still is the but he's not, clearly, because he's dead. So that there's still this wavering, there's still this doubt, whether they're talking physical or spiritual. There's still a lack of understanding in Jesus' work and intentions. Okay? Assess Jesus' response to them in verse 25. How foolish you are and slow to believe all the prophets have spoken. Harsh or fair? John? Both? Okay.
It's hard to get away from the scolding them, at least a little bit, but it's true. Love trying to wake them up.
Yeah.
Well, back to your other statement, the disciples who had been with him for 3 years didn't understand it, so.
They still didn't get it.
Totally separate, only peripherally connected aren't going to understand it either.
Yeah.
So, and that's, he's probably showing some frustration.
So Jesus, I have taught you for 3 years. I have literally been crucified and am alive, have risen from the dead, and I'm still having these conversations with you people. I am still having to explain what this is all about. Kelly.
At the same time, we're always referred to as sheep that are dumb animals. So it makes sense that we're still struggle with understanding this. Because we're sheep.
Yep, they're a little bit slow to understand, although I will say it is easy for us looking back at this story with the full gospel record and with 2,000 years worth of Christian church history to say, oh, come on, couldn't you figure it out? We tend to do that, right? We look at the Old Testament and accuse the children of Israel of the same thing. You couldn't go through 40 years, you couldn't make it 40 years without grumbling and complaining. Well, we certainly have the same doubts, have the same uncertainties, fall into the same sins. Marjorie.
Personally, I am still amazed at connecting with Old Testament prophecy. You'd think I would know that too, but or
Yeah.
you forget.
Right. And there's a bit of,
Just not in it enough for all the time to have that connection always in front of you.
right, to see that God knew what he was doing in the Old Testament and he was pointing us forward and in so many ways that we don't always appreciate or connect, and then through a study of the scriptures we see that connection. Steve and then Lori.
I mentioned the table when we first started talking along the motion there, sort of postulated that, we always take Thomas as the doubting Thomas, as the negative way. Maybe more positive might be to call him honest Thomas. Most of us, if we were really honest, have doubts at times during our life.
Yeah, for sure. We're going to get to a proof passage that I think sheds some light on that, and I'm going to make a similar point, that because of John 20, Thomas gets the label of doubter, but it was more than just he that was doubting. Lori, is your hand up? What?
Well, I was just doing an analogy. It's like work, when you, like in my job, I'm forever explaining a concept that to me is really easy to the same person 27 times, And they get some of it because in that passage they're saying, well, and what's more, it's the third day.
Yeah.
They knew something was going on. They're just having.
Isn't that interesting? They make a confession of who he was, and they're accurate about Jesus until the downcast, like, well, no, actually, you're right. You're on the right track. All of these things are correct, except for the fact that you're not smiling on today because it's Easter. Right. Chris. Yeah. How is it that you can look at the Old Testament and not come to the conclusion that Jesus is the Messiah? And quickly to answer that, so sometimes it's taking those prophecies that are talking about heaven or talking about a spiritual life and applying them to an earthly kingdom, applying them the way that the disciples were thinking that, if we just get rid of Rome, then we've got redemption. And then when you don't see the physical fulfillment that you're looking for, then you look beyond to something else. So Jesus gets rejected because he didn't restore the kingdom to David's empire, and make Israel a world power. So those that are looking for that, some of it also is what are you looking for in your own life? Jesus encounters people who reject him in his preaching because they're looking for him to be the bread king. And when he says, I'm here for more than just bread, I'm the bread of life. I'm here so that you can live eternally. Well, I don't want that. I want bread. I'd rather have free lunch. People end up rejecting for those reasons too. So when you're looking for physical blessings, you're looking for life here to be better at the expense of everlasting life, then you could look at some of those Old Testament prophecies, misunderstanding. You'd be mistaken, but say, this isn't what I was hoping for. This isn't what I was looking for. So that's a 2-minute answer to a much bigger and larger question and discussion. But does that make sense, Chris? Okay. All right, describe how these disciples and Jesus trade places from the beginning of the journey to the end. Yeah, Jesus is playing the role of ignorant traveler at the beginning, and the disciple, well, let me fill you in. Let me tell you how this is going. And then quickly, Jesus becomes the teacher, and they become the students, right? Okay, next section, verse 28 through 32. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, for it is nearly evening, and the day is almost over. So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread and gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. They asked each other, were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us? Okay, consider the roles that each of the three take as they sit for the meal. Anything unusual here? I had a couple passages about redemption. Zechariah and Anna at the beginning of Luke talk about Jesus being the Redeemer, and then here you have this redemption theme at the end. So, what's unusual? Bill?
If they're inviting him into their home, you would think they would lead the prayer, but Jesus takes charge.
Yeah. Joanne?
He was also distributing the food. He took the bread and wine and handed it out. Usually you give food to your guests, not take it.
Yeah, I'm sure this would have been a surprise for them that now Jesus is sitting here. He's leading the prayer. He's distributing the food. He's playing host in, I'm assuming this is their home. And you wonder, had his teaching begun to open their eyes a bit to, this is someone special? This guy's got this amazing knowledge of the Old Testament, and their assessment later is our hearts were burning as he, so did that just become natural? Like, I'm going to sit and receive whatever service this guy wants to give. Or was that an eye-opening, like, what's going on? What's happening? Either way, it's unusual from what you might expect. Agree or disagree? Jesus is celebrating Holy Communion with these disciples. Trish? Disagree? And why? Okay, there's no words of institution. There's no wine referenced. It'd be awkward to have a record of the disciples taking communion if there's no wine. There's Matthew 26, as Jesus is actually instituting the Lord's Supper. He says, I will not drink of this cup again until I drink it with you in my Father's kingdom. That seems to be Jesus saying, I'm not going to be presiding over this sacrament with you. So I would say probably unlikely that this is Holy Communion. The breaking of bread, Acts chapter 2, there's a reference to that as like a fellowship meal, that people are together in a friendly atmosphere and then bread is broken, distributed. More a social custom than actually the sacrament. We need to get going here. Significance of the fact that Jesus is recognized as he breaks the bread. Jesus is serving his people, serving them with a meal, serving them as their teacher. Their eyes are open to see the one who washed the disciples' feet, the one who served as host of many a meal. I think it's an interesting connection and significant there. Let's see, jumping down. Then their eyes were opened. Genesis 3 verse 7 is the reference about Adam and Eve's eyes being opened to see their nakedness, to see their sin. That's eyes opened in the opposite way, right? Now eyes are opened for them to see Jesus and to see his glory and to see the power of Jesus and his resurrection. Do you ever experience the reaction that the disciples did, or that these disciples did? Our hearts burned within us as he opened the scriptures. And should you? Marjorie, you kind of described that a little bit, reading through the Old Testament and light bulb moments of, wow, I never saw that before. Hearts burning within us.
I think lots of ways, certainly in worship, hearing the readings or the sermon or hymn verses, that you've sung for years and years and years, and you sing one day and it's like, whoa, I've never.
Now your life is just different enough that you got a different context or a different application, and wow, do those words have extra meaning. Sure.
A Christian friend saying something in passing that there's just tons of ways it happens.
Right. I think it's worth it for us to consider their reaction. The most amazing part of this story for them was not that we couldn't see Jesus, and it's not that Jesus served at our table, and it's not that our eyes were opened. It's our hearts burned within us as he opened up the scriptures to us. And that means the main take home of this story is not outside of our reach, because our hearts can burn as Jesus opens our eyes to see him in the Holy Scriptures. We can have an active devotional life, and our hearts too can burn. Jesus probably won't show up in your minivan on your way here from Jerusalem to Emmaus to your home. Maybe, probably won't. But he will appear to you in his holy word. And he wants to send his Spirit and give you that understanding and insight and enlightenment that he was able to give to these disciples. All right, quickly, 33 through 35. They got up and returned at once to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 and those with them assembled together and saying, "It is true, the Lord has risen and has appeared to Simon." Then the two told what had happened on the way and how Jesus was recognized by them when he broke the bread. Okay, what was the difference for these disciples? What was now added to the evidence that they had before? Is there a lesson for us in our lives? John.
Well, in Luke 34, the only evidence they probably had was Peter's testimony.
Okay.
And it became apparent then that maybe not everybody believed what Peter saw
Right?
or said.
Yep. And they had the angel's message, not good enough. They had the report of the women, not good enough. We're still downcast. Now they saw Jesus. Their eyes were opened, and now they believe. These were doubting disciples on the way out of Jerusalem and believing disciples sprinting their way back, right? I promised you this Mark 16 passage. Let's look that up. Mark 16, 12 through 13. Actually, I'm going to start at verse 9. When Jesus rose on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had driven 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him and who were mourning and weeping. When they heard that Jesus was alive and that she had seen him, they did not believe it. Afterward, here's our verses. Afterward, Jesus appeared in a different form to 2 of them while they were walking in the country. These returned and reported it to the rest, but they did not believe them either. Later, Jesus appeared to the 11 as they were eating. He rebuked them for their lack of faith and their stubborn refusal to believe those who had seen him after he had risen. So, this is really a whole, Thomas takes the fall for being the one who had to see to believe. But this whole day is filled with people, including these Emmaus disciples who weren't quite so sure until they saw him. And what an awesome lesson in God's grace that Jesus was willing to be seen. He was willing to allow those doubters to have the proof that they needed. Dr. Hebner said it really well. He repeats Thomas's words back to him. He comes and appears to this group of skeptics and breathes the Holy Spirit into them and makes them to be those who are faithful believers. So I thought that was an interesting proof passage or cross-reference to this Emmaus section, but also a statement from Scripture that says there's a lot of the I won't believe it till I see it going around on that first Easter.
There's a note here that says verses 9 through 20 weren't always included.
Would you look at the time? We are almost out. Man. Let's do our closing hymn, and then I will answer your question for anyone who would like to stick around for that. All right. Thanks for being here. We'll sing 2 stanzas of He's Risen. He's risen, he's risen, Christ Jesus the Lord. He opened death's prison, the incarnate Word. Break forth, hosts of heaven, in jubilant song, and earth, sea, and mountain the praises prolong. Then sing your hosannas and raise your glad voice. Proclaim the blessed tidings that all may rejoice. Laud, honor, and praise to the Lamb that was slain, who now sits in glory and ever shall reign. Thanks for being here today. Next time we'll look at Jesus' ascension. You are dismissed and free to go if you would like. I'll answer John's question about the closing verses of the Gospel of Mark.